Well, thank you very much. For this last session, it's going to be a little bit different. We're hoping to have more of a fireplace type of discussion as opposed to a typical Q&A. I'd encourage any of you just to raise your hand or to yell if you have a point to make. It's the end of the day. We've been through it. It's been a great day, but we should also, I think, embrace the fact that it might be a bit better to be a little less formal at this stage of the day. So, moving on, we've touched on this subject a number of times today. It seems to, be the eternal question that all of us face as designers, and it is who's our master? Who do we design for? Is it the owner? Is it the operator? Or is it the guest? And Tony earlier commented that this was a case of chemistry measuring, where sometimes it feels more like alchemy or dark magic, because you never know who you're going to be looking for every day as a designer, and who you're going to be responding to.
Sorry, Mr. Wester. Special request
Yes.
by the moderator.
Ah, perfect.
Please.
It's arrived. Yes, a little bit of talking juice for us.
This, I believe, is James' favourite rosé.
So that makes us the most unpopular people in the room straight away. Thanks.
You're the only one with
Sorry, but I have to indulge.
You're the only one with a tie in the room too, mate. You better get rid of the tie now.
Thanks, Howard. That's better. So, look, there isn't a definitive answer, as we all know, but we're each going to take a position. And we've got, representing the owners, obviously, Steve's there. We have Richard representing Marriott. James is going to represent the guest, and I'm going to chip in once in a while as the designer, but hopefully you'll hear a lot more of them than me after this little introductory. So, starting out, Stephen, as the owner is responsible for the designer's professional fees, would it be your position that the designer must be primarily answerable to the owner's instruction?
Yes. Well, look, maybe Richard will have a different view, but I think certainly from our experience, the operator's brief or the brand brief really only goes so far. It's generally about colour palettes, room sizes, seating count ratios, look and feel, etc., etc. But the owner's brief to the designer is going to be a lot more holistic, wide-ranging. It's going to cover aspects of risk management on the project. Does the site have constraints? Will we prefer, for either cost or time reasons, to go with prefab or conventional construction? There's how much we want to push the engineering of the hotel and the energy efficiency, how much recyclable material we want to include. These are a lot of things that will be owner-driven, and that wider sort of all-encompassing brief to the designers, I think, definitely the reason the designer needs to answer to the owner. Yep.
All right, well, thank you. Rich, then over to you. I mean, why should the operator be the primary focus of the designer's attention then?
Well, I know what you're getting at. You love to operator bash, but regardless of what some people might say, it's not always all about us. We do have a view that I think we've matured as operators, and we now know that the real magic happens when there's a genuine tripartite relationship. So the owner has a vision, their contractors are engaged to weave their magic and apply their unique style and put their stamp on a project, and we guide it because we want projects to honour the brand, to protect the legacy of the brand, but also to put a flag in the ground, another flag in the ground for us, whether it's W or Western or Bulgari or Moxie, whatever it means to someone, we need to protect that. So that's our position, and we provide some IP. I think if you put all of our 30 brand standards in a pile, you could probably see it from the moon. But that's unfortunately a fact of life, that we do have a lot of IP that we have to share, but we do acknowledge that it's a tripartite relationship, and we all come to the table with different aspirations. And the real magic, as I say, happens when that is honoured and when it's respected.
All right, well, thank you. So James, representing the guest's interests today, as someone who's literally travelled the world and stayed in some of the most exotic destinations, should the guest experience be the primary focus of the designer's attention, or should the brand promise be the mechanism to deliver the guest experience?
Interesting, because it depends on what the guest wants out of the hotel, right? I mean, if you're there as a business traveller and you're a road warrior and you're used to staying in mid-scale hotels all the time, then you're going to be after practicality and comfort out of a hotel. If you're a luxury guest, then you're going to be after something quite different in a hotel experience. But I think we're now getting a blend, funnily enough, of that comfort, practicality, and style coming into that mid-market perspective. So what was hotels being designed for practicality are now being designed for practicality with style at the same time. And I think we've seen that with some of the brands, obviously with what Richard's doing. We've seen that with what the Holiday Inn Express guys are doing. And I think it's interesting that it's being designed practically, but the guest is certainly in mind at that same point, because those 3.5 to 4-star hotels are a lot nicer than what they used to be.
Well, then, Steve, building on that, when determining operator selection, how critical is design to the decision-making process? Do you go and stay at various hotels, various properties, try to understand the presentation of it, or is it just a bottom line ROI that you're looking at?
Oh, no, it's critical, but I'd say it's maybe secondary to a few other areas. I mean, sort of what first comes to mind in selecting an operator and a brand is the brand equity that you're buying into, the operator's distribution power, its channel delivery, its capability as an operator. But design is critical, and if you don't believe that all those other areas are supported by a good design, and you heard a lot of people talk about engagement today, if you don't think you're going to engage the customer and get that balance right which was your last question, if you're not balanced enough to capture the engagement of the guest, you will fail. So it's critical, but I wouldn't say it's the most critical. It's a balance.
I think too, Paul, it depends on who the owner is. So some owners, their main aspiration is a number. It's a yield. It's a return on investment, because they might be a fund. But then there's a couple of guys in the room who I know are really passionate about launching a new brand of ours. So they wanted to see it firsthand. So we went to New York a few weeks ago and had a look at one, and they fell in love with it. Then they went to Europe, and then I think they got back about 3 weeks later, and they had a really good time. Now, what they wanted to do is to immerse themselves in the brand as first-time hotel owners, which is probably the most exciting part about what I do at the moment, is we've got new people coming to the table all the time, wanting to engage in our industry. And it's not just about the ROI. It's not just about that one yield number. For some of these guys, it's about leaving a legacy. It's about being pioneers. It's about an entrepreneurial spirit that I think our hotel industry has been lacking for about 20 years. And these guys are now coming from different fields and different industries to join us, and I'm really excited about it. So,
Oh, thanks. I like that. Well, with the well-publicized acquisition of Starwood, Marriott has a global portfolio of over 30 brands. So how critical is it for the designer to adhere to the brand and design standards while maintaining identity within the brand spectrum? So, I mean, how much space? As a designer, we come in and we talk to you. Is a little bit of a W and a splash of a JW? And how do we mix this all? Do we need to stay within that spectrum?
look, it's a fair question. Fair to say that 18 months ago when we acquired Starwood, the industry was holding its breath, saying how can a company with 30 brands maintain its different swim lanes with each brand when you're competing against each other? But our CEO came out and said, we're keeping the 30 brands. We bought Starwood for a reason. We like brands like Sheraton and Westin and Le Méridien. They've all got a role to play. So straight away we were told 30 brands is what it is. Get used to it, deal with it, and get smart about what you do. The challenge for designers, to your question, is that we ask you to honour those 30 swim lanes. But the challenge isn't that hard because we're not talking about colour palettes. We're not talking about the things that you know and I know nothing about. We're talking about the building blocks, the foundations of design. So room sizes. So I'll say to you that one of our Ritz-Carlton hotels can never have a room that's 25 square metres, please. We'd like them to be 45. We'll say to you that certain brands have to have a day spa or an executive lounge. They are not design challenges. They are building block fundamental principles that I'm sure a lot of these people learn on the first day of design school. So I don't feel like it's onerous. I don't lead with design. I leave that to the very end. So when I'm transactional, I'm negotiating a deal and someone says, show me your brand standards, I say, no, you don't want to see them, it's irrelevant. because it's a 700-page document of technical stuff that is going to blur the lines and scare the two guys that I spoke about before, scare the pants off them, because they think this is going to cost me a hell of a lot of money. Now, we can deal with that. My job is to help people like that navigate their way through a dirty big machine that's a New York Stock Exchange listed company. I'm just a small business person, like a lot of the guys I deal with. So I say it's not onerous. I say it's absolutely critical because we have to honour the brands, but we do have flexibility.
I'll have to challenge that a little bit. And Richard and I are having some other discussions at the moment. Look, to say that they're all the brand standards are building blocks, so I'm not sure that that's right. And there has to be a component where the standards are challenged, where they're not locally relevant or regionally relevant. For the big international companies, we've seen that with some of the developments that we're working on. They're certainly pushing things down. But to their credit, they're also being a little bit flexible when that design or brand standard hasn't been tested in this local region. And we have to, through our engagement of the local design team, use their expertise to try and customise that to the market that's here. And we think that's how we're going to satisfy who James is advocating for, the guests. If it's not locally relevant, then perhaps those building blocks need a little bit of shaping.
If you look at the whole question about who to impress, I think that the bathrooms getting smaller, I don't think is impressing any guest at the moment. I think if you look at from an owner standpoint, or whether it comes in operators' brand standards, or I'm just finding in that mid-scale to upscale segment, these bathrooms are becoming like smaller than Emirates bathrooms on board A380s. And I'm
What's
just
the right
wondering why
size,
it's getting
James?
so small.
What's the right size?
I think you've got to I think because they've been compacted now to a point of forget the bath anymore, it's just put down to a shower. But literally some of them are probably, obviously we're seeing bigger rooms now, or the hybrid kind of bathroom half into the room. Is this coming from an owner's perspective primarily, or do you think we're getting brands that are driving this at the same time, or is it the designers that are making them more compact? Where's it coming from?
I think it's a really good example, a practical example of designers doing their work. It's not a brand standard. For us, that integration is not a brand standard across any of our brands. It's not necessarily a wish from an owner's point of view, but it might be an influence from designers.
Well, that's almost the equivalent of having the open kitchen, though, isn't it? Having the bath in the room. It was this trend for a long time, that this sort of 10-year window where everyone was trying to put the bathtub behind a piece of glass, or literally, I've seen them beside the bed. And you wonder how you're even going to use that room functionally, because this water's going to get everywhere. But there was that sort of trend for a while that...
Timo's got some at the old Clarifew, want some good examples of it.
But, the bathrooms are getting smaller, but the TVs are getting bigger, remember? So that's the payoff. But can I say, to Steve's point...
It doesn't always mirror across to the TV from your own
it doesn't.
device. You need to have, Google. If you need to download another app to do that kind of stuff, mate.
Look, in our defence, Stephen, if I may, take a brand like St Regis. The flexibility that we demonstrate with St Regis is evident by the fact that we can have one in Bora Bora with overwater bungalows. We can have one on Fifth Avenue in New York in a historic building, the first one. And then we can have one in a shiny tower in Shanghai. And all the room sizes are different. The things that bring them together are not necessarily design outcomes. They're the service elements, the butler for every room, certain things that we do. So we do open up ourselves to Indigenous native experiences that do give it a sense of place. We are big on that.
It's interesting, if you look at that concept of when we talk about the bathrooms getting smaller, I think the lobby spaces are more adaptable for guests nowadays. You look at the practicality of lobbies with the shared space, obviously, of either a cafe or a bar, or like we're seeing what Ovolo have done up in Brisbane at the New Inchcombe, where they've turned the reception desk into the bar and moved what was the restaurant back from that. So they've got a dual hybrid thing that we've seen. We haven't seen this for quite some time. It's been something I saw in Scandinavia almost 20 years ago. But I think the lobbies are becoming more practical for guests again. I think that's good. I think it's the whole big question for me is the room. I'm at the moment, I think from a mid-scale, we're not getting impressed. On the luxury spectrum, no. On the other end of the spectrum, I was just in Rome a few weeks ago at Hotel Eden, which is Dorchester Collection, and they gutted a building there that was a former hotel. And the bathrooms are absolutely stunning, and they're big, huge bathrooms. Big baths are back in place again. 2 sinks are in there again. A shower's in there again. So the luxury end, we're seeing more space than ever back into the bathroom versus the actual bedrooms again. Bedrooms are a bit tighter, but I think it's interesting watching on the luxury side of things versus on the mid-scale side of things.
I definitely agree with you, because I think on the luxury side, there's a tendency actually at the moment, and I don't disagree, that if you're paying upwards of 500 or 1,000 US a night, you're not wanting to welcome the local neighborhood into the space. You actually want to have a quiet, private space designed for the guests only, and you want to have that sense of exclusivity. But when you start nailing down a few pegs, then it is that kind of joie de vivre that you want inside, that you want the neighborhood inside your space. There's a different type of application to the lobby depending on the price point that you're entering the market in.
And with the other one I'm seeing too at the moment is a hotel in London. I was at last week, the Beaumont, which is another whole story in its own right. That was actually a made-up story how that hotel came about. They've got a bar in there that's just for guests in the hotel, that's hidden off the back of the lobby. That's through another door. I've seen that in a few hotels now too, where it is the bar can get quite busy from other people wanting to come in and have a drink. And now hotels are now keeping a separate space available for guests in the hotel who can enjoy a drink, don't have to walk down to the bar and go, I can't even get a seat, I can't get a space at the bar, I can't get a table, you know?
Or something.
But you can get a room. In New York, we advertise 12 square metre rooms, and we call them crash pads at the Moxie there. And the ads are in the bar. So
That's the size of the bathroom at the St. Regis in New York.
It's a prison cell. 12 square metres is a prison cell.
Well, James, getting back on track, guest experience seems to be the mantra for every brand of every spectrum. How would you define guest experience, and do you think that it's possible to tailor design for everyone to have an exceptional and individual experience? I mean, we as designers, certainly with resorts, if we're talking about an exotic location, we will talk about the Russian guest, or the guest from China, or the guest from Norway, or the guest from Germany. So is it possible to do this within design?
We probably should have asked Sven. That would have been quite interesting to get the Norwegian perspective on it. It's interesting because when we do Aussies, we're pretty laid back when it comes to travelling, and I think we're very different to what that Chinese or Russian market wants, particularly throughout Asia. I think it's very different, but I think a lot of it comes down, I guess, is to choice in hotels. I mean, if you're in a resort, there's nothing worse than just having one restaurant or bar to go to literally for 4 or 5 nights in a row. So I think having opportunities to have other different experiences, I think, is a good thing, whether even if it's off property. A lot of resort areas now are offering you to be able to go into towns and charge back in some regional areas. I think that's a really cool concept when the hotel can't do a lot with it. But, I think from an experience standpoint, I think across the board, Asia Pacific, a lot of the high-end hotels are getting the experience component of it right. And I think it's tricky because they've got to do it now for so many different audiences. I mean, even here in Australia, China's just overtaken New Zealand as the biggest inbound market. So we now have to start thinking, are the hotels going to be in Australia, the new hotels that are coming, even the Western Perth that just opened, are they ideal for Chinese? Are they ideal for Aussies? Are they ideal for Brits coming in? So we've got to look at it from that real spectrum of, are the hotels, from a design standpoint, practical for up to 20 different markets at the one point?
Well, Steve, how would you respond to guest experience? Does guest experience equal ROI, or how from your perspective, where does that factor into your role?
We would pass this question to the operator and ask them to give us a view on that. We definitely rely on the operator to be right at the forefront of understanding guest experience, and we'd want to hear everything from their side about how as James said, is the guest experience about the occasion that they're staying? Is it about the reason or where they've come from, et cetera, et cetera? But this is really something we'd pass to the operator and say, inform us, and then would make the ROI decision after being informed.
Thanks, Steve. So we would say to that, we would acknowledge, first of all, that right now is the most challenging time in hotel history to get it right. 2 reasons. One, people are coming from different places, so the origin of guest is changing. It wasn't that long ago where only 15% of our customers were from overseas. In the next 3 years, that could be 50%. The other thing that's happening is they're getting younger. So the millennial mindsets, or the millennial age bracket, however you want to describe them, are going to behave differently to traditional customers that we've been dealing with for decades. Now, overlay that to give it some context for today's session. The design challenge is then with this new wave of hotels. So we've got Ritz-Carlton's coming, St Regis is coming. What do they mean to a 25-year-old Chinese traveller? I'm challenging myself on this, because when I walked into St Regis, New York, and it's in Fifth Avenue and it's just gorgeous and it's old school, I wouldn't stay there. It's just not me. Nor would I stay at the Ritz-Carlton. So I'm in the middle of this sort of change, if you like, and I just wonder how relevant those legacy hotels, those flagship legacy hotels, are going to be to those millennials. And we're going to entrust you guys as designers to make those same brands relevant in the next few years to a totally different customer base. Exciting, but challenging.
Well, you say that because I was at the 25 Hours Hotel in Zurich a few weeks ago, and I'm not sure if anyone's been into a 25 Hours yet, but they're, which Accor I think's got 30%, I think, a stake in the company. They're doing some amazing hotels at the moment that are very obviously high spec on design, great F&B, great interior design, but at the same point you'll see some 20-somethings walking out of the elevator. The next elevator, I saw some 60-something Germans getting out of the elevator. So even by doing these cool lifestyle hotels, designer hotels, you've got to think about the 20-something and you've got to think about the 60-something as well, because we're not just seeing 20-somethings in these designer hotels at all. We should ask Timo the question, see what the old Claire's mix is, but I can tell you it's going to be quite a wide spectrum. So it's funny adapting it for that market, but thinking that is it still practical for retirees to come in as well?
And we've still got 500 Sheratons around the world we have to fill. They will be a different guest profile than the 1,000 Courtyard by Marriotts we have to fill. So concurrently, we're having this challenge of understanding a whole bunch of different customers, but also understanding where our brands fit in the future. We know where they fit yesterday, but where do they fit in the future? Because you can't pick up a hotel and just dust it off and turn it into something different. It is what it is, by and large.
Well, and you have owners to answer to. You can't just say, ta-da, we've got a brand new brand. Here's you go out and spend $20 million and upgrade your hotel. That happened in Singapore with the Hotel Jen. They just told the owner that they had to do it, and it turned into a bit of an embarrassing situation at one point. But it's a lovely property now. It turned out well. Steve, at the end of the day, a hospitality development is a multi-million-dollar investment that must provide financial returns for the investors. So how should the designer respond to the owner when the operator is insisting on including design elements that are outside of your budget?
Okay, a challenge. First of all, as an owner, you have to do your homework. I guess before we sign up to any brand or any operator, we make sure we understand what the standards are. We understand that they can be incorporated in our project scope, which has had a feasibility assessment on it. When you sign up to a brand, you're doing it because you believe in it. And if you believe in it, therefore you want the scope that the operator puts in front of you to be included in the scope that you've given your designer. So that's where you really have to start, do your homework. Now, not everything gets covered when you do your homework. And I know I've made mistakes, I've missed things, and then yes, we get to that challenge of this has come up, could be an extra bit of signage or this or that, but it is expensive and you can't see the ROI. Well, that's where you call on Richard's tripartite approach and come to the table, and everyone's got a mutual interest of making the project a success. So where can be the compromise, and be prepared to give in order to get, and approach it with the understanding that everyone mutually wants to be successful.
Well, I want to find out from Richard something on this. How flexible, Richard, now are you getting with designing to brand standards now, given how different hotels are coming up? I mean, I'll use that Holiday Inn Express example, and they're well designed above the Holiday Inn Express. We're seeing some Pullman hotels that are being designed well above that spec as well. You're seeing the same thing with yours. The Westin in Perth is one of the nicest hotels that's come out in Australia for a long time. How flexible are you allowed to be in Australia now to achieve some of those elements, or do those elements differently?
Yeah, really good question, because we've got new brands coming to market here that are established elsewhere. I'm charged with growing them in Australia Pacific region, And I'll say to the custodians of the brand at head office, I'll say, look, I know that you're meant to be 28 square metres or 30 square metre room according to brand standards in North America, but I really feel like Wollongong is not New York. And this developer wants to do this. So, cut me some slack here. I get a yes. I generally get a yes. So the flexibility is there within reason. I've been in my short time with the company, I've been really very pleased with the level of autonomy and flexibility that we have based on market, because Marriott understands, we are 1%. My patch is 1% of the company. So what I do doesn't change the dial on the share price, which is awesome. So when I muck up, it doesn't matter. And I had my boss from head office in America out recently. He'd never been to Australia. Never, ever been to Australia. And I said, well, we signed 2,000 rooms last year in Australia, Tony. And he said, yeah, that's great. It's 1% what we did globally. And I said, yeah, but that 1%'s my 100%. And it's really important to me. And he said, right answer. And got on a plane and went home. And I said, look, do you want to meet some owners? Do you want to get out and about? And he said, no, that's your job. I want to climb that bridge, Sydney Harbour, and then get out of here. And it just reminded me that we are a very, very, very small piece of the global puzzle. Tiny. And we shouldn't forget that, because sometimes we get wrapped up in our own self-importance. We think we're good at what we do. We fail to realise that we can be better. And I think the hotel industry has been guilty of that we think we're pretty good and we're not. My last trip abroad proved that to me. So reality check. I don't know why I've got onto this topic. Might be something I'm peddling internally.
You know what I'd like to know? I mean, Paul, I'd like if you could actually answer that question yourself from when you were with Jumeirah. What happens from a design standpoint when the owner hasn't put some standards in and he's got no more cash left? What happened in the Jumeirah when you were with Jumeirah a few years ago?
Well, you have to have a long conversation and look at alternative ways. There was a few projects where we came up with some mezz loans, or we organized financing on behalf of the client, found them investors that would come in and help, because you had a brand that there were a lot of Middle East investors who believed in the brand and still do. It's a great brand. So you bring them into the game and see if we could get a joint venture to play out. You have to, you have to try to find a way to make it work, because at that stage, let's say you're 3/4 of the way through the project, there's $200-400 million already down the drain. You can't tear the building down and start over again and put in a shopping center. So you have to find a way to make it work. And certainly if you're in a place like China, these are big billboards, and the government will see that this building isn't being finished. And there'll be some serious questions to be answered. And if they don't answer them the right way, then they just get the projects taken away from them.
And then what happens when the owner's not happy with the management company, like we saw in Mumbai? I'm not sure if you guys know this story with the St. Regis, which was built as a Shangri-La. And then after a year, they had to close it and renovate it for almost a year because the owner didn't want to deal with Shangri-La anymore, and spent another fortune turning it into a St. Regis, brand new hotel. Ripped the staircase up, put new marble in, changed a few things around. An amazing hotel. It's literally didn't want to deal with Shangri-La anymore, and then stopped, and then basically closed it, and then redid it up as a St. Regis.
Well, taking a step back, though, Richard, at the beginning of the discussion, you said that we need to adhere to the building blocks of the design guidelines. But if you're saying that we're a small market here in Australia, wouldn't this be look at the talent in this room and the talent in this nation? Wouldn't this be the most fertile ground to innovate and to actually challenge those and to say, we don't need a 45 square meter room, it can be 40, or it could be anything. It could be any, but there's enough talent here that you're not dealing with, let's say, a less developed market where it'll just be a miracle to get the project across the line and functional. Where here, with the contractors, with everyone involved, that you are going to get quality, or you should if you pay for it. Wouldn't this be the most fertile ground for innovation to bend that spectrum?
Yeah, I think so, and I think there's a lot of ingenuity in Australia. I think we're known for that. So yes. The other thing is Australia has got so many sub-markets. So length of stay is a really critical thing. It's something we don't concentrate on enough. But when we're all talking about our aspirations for a new hotel, the first thing we should think about is how the consumer is going to behave in that hotel. The first thing is, how long do they stay? So on the Gold Coast, we've got all these 80s apartments that are, 100 square metres, 160 square metres. There's a reason for that, because people used to stay there for 2 weeks. And in Sydney, we've got 28 square metre 5-star hotel rooms, because the Japanese used to come for one night, and they were Japanese in the 80s. So what we've got is legacy product that is linked to consumer behaviour, and it's something that I think we've lost sight of. So now we have to say, okay, let's think about how long someone is going to stay on the Sunshine Coast now. So if you want to do something in Noosa, it's a domestic market, it's the eastern suburbs set of Sydney and Melbourne. How long do they stay for? How do they behave? And then design your product around it. Then when you come to brand standards, you need to think about that. So we need to connect those two conversations together. So when I have the conversation with Hong Kong, with my guys, and I say, we're doing something in a place called Noosa, which they've never heard of, and the reason it's going to be this square meterage is because this is how the person from the eastern suburbs of Sydney behaves. And they do listen.
But your new Marriott executive apartments on St Kilda Road look more like Weston or something more than a Marriott executive apartments, though, at the same time, don't they?
Yeah, so that's probably a bit smaller than some destinations, because the average length of stay won't be corporate. It'll be shorter, sort of business stay.
And you've got almost a very residential product going in. Is that right?
There's a question from the audience, and it's, do you think the traditional full design before tender model is going to become obsolete, given that designs are always over budget and programs are too tight to allow for this procurement model? That's a bit of a mouthful.
Yeah.
Did you get it?
Yeah. Did you hear that? Sounds like more of a. I think that would be more for Steve. I think.
So it's is the traditional full design before tender model going to become obsolete? This person is saying, given that designs are always over budget and programs are too tight to allow for this procurement style. I'm quoting.
Steve, how would you structure the appointment then?
My first thought about that would be, depending on whether you're building a luxury hotel or a mid-scale. I think mid-scale or even limited service or entry level, I think you could still do it that way. Luxury, the projects are probably going to run longer. I like some things that Tony was saying earlier today about sort of white boxing and allowing the design to evolve. So I think it's probably my gut instinct to answer that is it's probably, first of all, understanding what you're designing for or what the project is, and then the method in which you'd undertake that project would suit that asset class.
And I would
Paul,
add on.
you've
I would
got
add on to that.
2 minutes.
Okay, I would add on to that it's also important for the designer to have a clear understanding of the budget on the onset. If the projects that you're working on are always going over budget, you need to take your thumbs and point them at yourself in a sense, because you're clearly not talking to the owner, and you need to engage, or the owner clearly isn't understanding the size of the project, the scale of it. So you need to use your experience and educate the owner to say, listen, mate, you're trying to do a 5-star, luxury hotel for $50,000 a key. It's not going to be possible. So I think there's a communication issue that you need to have as well with that type of response.
Richard, where's the St Regis going? I heard you mention that before.
That'll do.
No, I didn't.
All right, well, quickly, Richard. Operators require developers to sign a technical services agreement and pay an associated TS fee. Can you explain why this is even necessary with regards to design direction and approvals, and how the process intersects with the work of the owner's contractors?
Okay, so very briefly, technical services agreement is really important. It's an instrument that governs the relationship between the owner and the operator. So it says, Mr. Owner, you've got all the money, you will build the hotel to our standards, and our standards are these. In the middle of those two parties sit designers, and you are charged with obviously doing all the work for the owner who engages you, but we play an oversight role. So the TSA says that Marriott International will have oversight of the work being done. We tick the boxes, we make sure it's safe, we make sure it's legal, we make sure it's brand compliant. It's a process that we have to follow to ensure that our standards are met. Do we do the work? No. We tick it off. We have guiding influence, but we do save you from some mistakes at times because we've got 6,500 hotels, and we're going to open one every 13 hours for the next 3 years, which is just an outrageous number, but that's what's happening as we speak. So we're moving fast, and we know that if you design that maybe that's not going to give you the best outcome because we did 3 of them in China and it didn't work. So you do get some intel from us. The other thing you get is a bunch of manuals, so the IP that we put a value on. The owner pays us a fee for that oversight. They pay us a fee for that IP, and we just have influence.
Yeah.
Does that answer the question?
Perfectly, thank you. And there's no more questions, Howard? I think we're a little bit itchy for everyone else to get their drinks in at the moment, so we've been enjoying ours up here. So I think at this stage we should thank the members of the panel and thank everyone for attending today. Thank you very much.